Welcome back to View of Two. Today we decided to come down to Durban beachfront. It's a nice, cooly warm, cool for Durban 21.
It's cold for Durban 21.
We're sitting outside the Suncoast Pirates Surf Life Saving Club. And what I wanted to discuss with Non today was...
Which you forced me to do.
I haven't forced you to do anything. Was to address the idea that she actually pitched to me a while ago about what is, or how do we see ourselves in terms of our self-identification. How do we identify? Maybe you can fill us in on what you were thinking or your methodology behind the principle.
Okay, I tend to be long-winded, so...
Well, keep it short, please.
I'm gonna try. I think I should start with my background. So, in the introduction, you would have known that I went to boarding school. In boarding
already I'm falling asleep.
Whatever. So in boarding school, I went to a German boarding school, and for the longest time, those were the nuns there were my primary parents. I went home every 3 months. I'd go home for a weekend. So I spent my formative years in a German Catholic school. And it wasn't until I got out and associated more with different people that I realized that people looked at me differently, and I couldn't understand why. I was black, I am black, I was Zulu, and yet people who were black and Zulu didn't quite feel that I was black enough or Zulu enough. And it was something that I'd never questioned until other people who looked like me started to question that. And it wasn't really until varsity where somebody said to me I wasn't black enough, and it really hurt, and I didn't understand what that meant. And I remember going to my mom, and I asked her, I said, "Mom, I had this person say to me that I'm not black enough." I was wanting my mom to comfort me, and my mom said to me, "Of course you're not." And I was really shocked, and so I said, "How am I not black enough?" And she said that...
Before you carry on, black enough or Zulu enough?
Black enough.
But there's lots of blacks who are Zulus, and there's lots of people who aren't Zulu who are black.
I know, but so this is why...
So isn't there a different culture between the
blackness,
Xhosa and the Zulu, and so it's could have... So how do you differentiate between that then?
But that's why this conversation's here, right?
Cool.
And so she said the way I spoke wasn't black enough. My posture wasn't black enough. And I thought that was really interesting. And my mom said to me, "When you were in school, were you taught how to walk?" And I said, "Yes, you're taught to straight back, neck up, head up, and you walk forward." And she said, "That's not how most black people walk." And it wasn't until then that I realized most black people that I associate or that I see in KwaZulu-Natal, since Hiram's brought this up, our eyes tend to be down. Our backs are slightly hunched, not like a hunchback, but slightly hunched. We usually walk this way. And so my mom had said, "Yeah, you walk very white." And I had never, of course, thought of it as a white walk. I just thought this is how I was taught to walk.
White waddle.
Well, yes, but yes. So that was really my first introduction of how do I identify, how do I see myself, but also how do people see me. And then fast forward, then of course, no, okay, we'll talk about that later. Fast forward to Hiram and I were having a conversation once, and I brought up a subject that I brought up with another person from church. I go to a church that most people would consider predominantly white. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I remember asking Sean, I won't say his surname, about mixed race children. And the first thing that Sean said was, "I don't have a problem with mixed race children. It's just, what would they be?" And I was very confused by that, because I was like, they'd be children. And he said, "No, but what race would they be?" And it was just a...
Why were you confused, no?
Because that's not the first thing you ask. These are my kids. They're going to be my kids. That's what they're going to be. And then...
But either they'll be black or they'll be white.
They'll be mixed race.
Coloured?
No, coloured is a South African thing.
Okay.
They'll be mixed race. That's what they'll be. Why does that matter? They don't stop being children. They don't stop being human.
But how do they identify that?
They identify as human and mixed race.
Okay, so we've had this discussion before.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
It wasn't until I asked Hiram the same question about mixed race children, and Hiram was also talking about, mixed race children are not a problem as such, but what do they identify with? That I realized the importance of pigmentation to people. How it's one of the first things that people consider when you ask them, who are you? You'll have most people say, I am a black Zulu, or they'll say I'm Zulu, and we'll assume black comes with it. For white South Africans. White South Africans, actually, funny enough, white South Africans will tend to say to you, I'm white, before they'll say, I come from Scotland or whatever. It's almost as if white is an identifier and not a pigmentation. And so that's how we got to this.
Well, it would be an identifier because whether you're from Scotland or Holland or Germany, you're white.
But when you speak to black people, they don't say the first thing is I'm black. They'll say Zulu, they'll say Xhosa. They'll never say I'm a black Zulu. That's taken for granted.
That's where the disparity is.
Right?
Yes.
And it's almost as if you want to say to white people, white is just a pigmentation. It's not a race. It's how do you use color as an identifier? I think that's part of the
let's go
difference.
back to, we were talking about your sister who lived in England.
Yes.
Now, that's interesting because it appears that they identify as English first. And then they have the racial breakdown.
Yes.
So maybe explain that. I mean, what did your sister say she experienced?
So I haven't asked her if I could share her experience, but
it's not personal, it's just a general...
Yeah. Temaya came back and she said that she realized that racism is a made-up thing. And I was like, what? And she said she came from South Africa, where the biggest differences between people was the color of their pigmentation. I use the word pigmentation on purpose, but the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And when she went to England, people didn't judge you on the color of your skin. They judged you on whether you were English or not. And so if you were born in England and if you identified as English, whether you were black or white, they tended to be bonded more together, and not like the Polish or not like the Irish or not like anything else. And that was their racism in England. Whereas in South Africa, our racism is much more along racial lines.
Okay. So the reason why we bring this up is because how we identified will determine how we react to what is being said or what's going on in the environment around us. So if you identify primarily as a white or a black person, when someone says something that may seem offensive, your reaction will be a great deal more than if you identify primarily as something else and it's lower down in the list.
Can I use an example?
Yeah.
So one of the things we spoke about was the George Floyd thing. And
who's George Floyd? I'm just kidding.
George Floyd is a man in America who was killed by the police. He was a black man killed by a white police officer, or who died as a result. Okay, because the courts haven't said
the evidence hasn't been laid forward completely yet.
Yes, so who died as a I don't know how to put it correctly in legal terms, but a white police officer had his knee on his neck for some
8
time.
minutes and 39 seconds.
Okay, 8 minutes and 39 seconds. And when Hiram and I were speaking about this, I realized that we were almost divided in terms of the color of our skin. I felt that Hiram thought I was seeing something just because I was black, and I honestly felt there were things that Hiram was seeing because he was white. And it was all of those things where I had to calm down and say, wait a minute. Of course, if we're being honest, South Africa, for those of us who even heard a little bit about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, we realized that some people were like, okay, so it was one person, but what about this? And then for a black person, I'll be like, no, before you go, what about this? A person died. And so there's this racial tension.
Well, how it happened was, we were talking about the resultant protests and then riots and looting.
Yes.
And I was saying you can't justify
the
looting and rioting by an event that happened in Minneapolis and then justify it around the world. And you came back and said, no, but we still got to remember that it's about a death. And I'm like,
human being
that's a
died.
separate issue. This is a new issue. The protesters, peaceful protesters, may have been there, but now there's now an element which is violent rioting and looting.
And I was saying, yes.
Which is not right.
Yes, writing is not right. But I was saying, you seem, Hiram, to be concentrating more on the writing and not giving pause to say, wait a minute, let's just acknowledge that a human being died.
Which I do.
Well, you do not. You
I always
understand.
did,
I know,
but you
but we
misunderstood.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying to YouTube and to South Africa that it almost seemed as if we get along quite well, but even then we seem to have been seeing each other across racial divides. And so it was all of these things where I paused and I was like, how does one identify? And depending on how you identify, you take certain issues and understand certain issues a certain way, and you respond to certain issues in a very particular way according to your identifier. So the one time I then but for me the really poignant one was the idea of a man having children and not knowing what they would be was mind blowing to me. And I realized,
who are you having children?
a man, because I was showing
an
you.
individual.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the first question a man would ask is, what would they be? And so for me, I realized that race was so important that a person having a child would want to know that, which was so alien to me because my first thought was what a child would be a child. And so then we sat down and tried to identify the different ways in which you can identify yourself with, and to maybe ask you, South Africa, the questions we've asked ourselves is, if you could have a hierarchy of how you identify, how would you put it? We'd really like to know what your answers are. So do you want to start?
No, I agree. Well, I thought about it and I realized that my race is probably halfway down the list, maybe to more near the bottom, because I identify primarily as a free individual. I then identify as an individual who's free yet has principles. So I've chosen to live certain principles. So those are my two top identifiers, and everything else is kind of a wash of I have Scottish heritage, I have Dutch heritage, I have
your gender.
I'm a male. So those things are lower down on the list because primarily I'm a free individual, and I listen to my inner being, which is my conscience, my guide, and I choose to live a principled life. So when you come with a racially charged comment, I'm not so affected by it, because I'm not so heavily invested in it.
So for me, how I identify is, and this is a really hard concept to explain unless you've been using this language for a while, but like Hiram, I identify as what we usually call an entity. How would I put that?
Intelligence.
An intelligence. I am an independent thing, independent of God, independent of race, independent of country, independent of everything except myself.
And then you choose beyond
and
that.
then I choose beyond that, but it's because I am that thing that has the ability to choose. That's what I see first, and that's how I see everybody first, as an independent intelligence that then has all of these other things added to it. And then Hiram calls it principle, and I think he's correct. I choose principle. I think. I haven't agreed yet.
Okay.
He says principles. I say I then identify, because I'm very religious, as a child of God, so as a spirit being. And because I identify as a child of God, there are certain principles that I then adopt. Or maybe I adopted certain principles and that's why I'm a child of God. I'm not really sure how I would put it, but I think it's very close to that. As you can see, people, I've obviously really thought about this a lot. My third identifier is my gender. I'm female. That's an incredibly important identifier for me as an individual. And so you'll, maybe as time goes by, things that have to do with gender are really important to me. And then my fourth identifier is as a human. That's how I see those. So those are the things I'll see. And an independent being. I'll see a child of God. I'll see a man before I see a human. And I'll see a woman before I see a human. Then I'll see a human. And then for me, I then identify as Zulu, then as African, then as black. And those things have been very important and interesting for me as a black person in South Africa, trying to live the world with other black people. Because I've realized in having this conversation, why other black people look at me and go, you're black, but you're not quite black enough. And it wasn't until I realized that people have such an attachment to the color of their skin that I don't have. And I am less unhappy with myself and not being fully one with my people, because I can understand that that is not where I am. I think that irritates me, though. I know I'm talking a lot. I'll let you talk.
Yeah, my left ear is starting to wear out a little bit now.
Wait, just 1 second. I find it interesting that a lot of white people, when they talk to me, will think, oh, non, you're not like the other blacks. I tended to be a little bit offended by that. I'd be like, but I am black. To my mind, it would almost sound as if they're saying I'm not black like the other black people. And a lot of you who've gone to Model C schools will hear that just because of your accent or what have you, people will think you're like what we call the other black. And so I'd like to know what it means if a white person says to you, you're not like the other black.
It's a very interesting concept, because I've never thought about being different to any white people.
Yeah.
There may be a social and a economic sort of standing, but it doesn't affect me to the extent that it has you, because I'm not having someone saying, hey, you're not white enough, because you don't think in an extreme manner, or you don't think. And then again, having said that, South Africans as a culture, do we really have a culture? Because we're sort of a mixture of all sorts of European and all over the place. So for me, I've just seen myself as a white guy, and I haven't really delved too deep into it.
Yeah. No. Except where we can say you've seen yourself as not Afrikaans.
Well, I can't really say that, because my grandparents' side, I'm about a quarter Afrikaans.
But do you think
Huguenot,
you're Afrikaans enough?
It's Huguenot. I don't identify as Afrikaans, but I have Afrikaans blood in me. So, maybe if someone came and said to me, she's not Afrikaans enough, well, I can't comment to that, because I don't identify as that.
Yeah. Or if somebody said to you, well, you're not Scottish enough.
Yeah.
You know, but because you're not...
I have a little red in my beard.
Well, that's true.
About the only...
But because it's not an African thing,
not African thing.
It wouldn't be something that is a question.
But having said that, a lot of Scottish people have come here and have adopted Africa as their country, and love the place. Apparently, I met a guy in the Midlands once. He was a Scottish singer, and he said that the Midlands is like Scotland but with good weather. So it's like Scotland but with good weather. So I haven't had that experience you have.
Yeah.
But the point why I'm bringing it up is that how we want to how we look at ourselves as individuals on a hierarchical scale will determine how we behave and how we react to a racial comment or to the events that are going on around us. And because our conversations, but because mine is relatively low my whiteness is lowish on my list, I don't react as heavily as some do. And because your
blackness,
so we're able to come from a more neutral position
as far as race is concerned,
and not get emotional about it. Although we've gotten emotional because we misunderstood each other, but not because of the
race. Yeah.
So in the future, when we're discussing it, we'll be looking at it from a very sort of a less racially charged, or I can't think of the word right now, but so I feel that it won't be as it'll be more diluted, put it that way.
Yeah. As far as race, we have many disagreements.
Well, we're going to be getting into the role of the male and the female and all those kind of issues, which can be quite incendiary. Yeah. But
I think South Africa would really like to know: do you think it's possible to separate yourselves in the way that we have and have a hierarchy of things, or do you think your whiteness or your blackness is so much a part of you that to separate it is ludicrous and you think we're crazy? Have you ever thought how do you identify?
And maybe even change the way you identify.
Yeah.
To try and lessen the blow.
Yeah. And can the color of your skin truly be the most important identifier? And if it is, can you explain to us why it is that?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Done. Yeah.
I'm done.
Looking forward to your comments.
Absolutely. Comment below. Please remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.